Be patient. Change can't occur overnight, and you know, like I said, it's not just a matter of dropping devices in and expecting change. Things have to take time to occur. You know, just sort of like what Jeff was just talking about. There's a maturation process. It's getting people to buy in. It's not something that just happens. So, you know, I would just tell people, be patient, and don't look at it on just one front. There are multiple fronts to be looking at in order to make change.
I guess, you know, my advice for districts that are kind of new and kind of moving into the space is, you know, I think to really make sure that they first spend the time focusing on the academic side. What is it that they want to be able to do before they go and try and build the system, because that can really make a difference. And fortunately, I guess, there are now so many people who are involved in this work, and you know, Maine has been doing this for so long now. We're into, I think, year 13 of our one-to-one program, and there's many other districts that have done this. And so, looking at both, you know, whether it's the device issues, the Wi-Fi issues, or the broadband issues, there's a lot of intelligence out there, both among the school communities, but also among the vendors. And to be able to leverage that intelligence, I remember when we first started building networks. You know, I can honestly remember some of the techs, you know, discussing on the listservs that they went in to look at the settings on their Apple Airport base stations and were confused why they were all on different channel numbers. And should I go and change them all to be on the same channel because I want everyone to be able to talk? You know, and not realizing and understanding what that was. And back in 2002, it was all very new to us. So, you know, there are those times when there are other folks out there who I think know a lot about this, and to try and leverage that. I think one of the things that we've done as a state program that I think has been very successful for us has been that our relationship with our primary partners, like Apple, has never been one where we simply put in a purchase order for a bunch of computers and bought them, you know, and then said, oh, and include the SKU for the Apple Care warranty, right? But it was more a partnership and more a program that really was a contract that was based on service, right? So Apple provides to the state of Maine a service that provides a device, and a service that provides repair and warranty and uptime on the networks, throughput on the networks, you know, performance to support what we know of as a one-to-one classroom. And so having those kinds of service level agreements and metrics versus simply, well, I bought the computer, right, is a very different kind of relationship to have with the vendors. And I think a lot of the vendors actually would prefer that in many instances, because the last thing any vendor wants, software or hardware, is to see your school buy equipment or buy software or services, not necessarily take great advantage of them. Maybe things don't go so well. Maybe you end up in the newspaper or, you know, something of that sort. And then people turn and think, well, if you hadn't bought that particular device, if you bought a different one, or if you'd gone with a different software package, maybe it would have been better. And now their name has gotten dragged into something that maybe was an implementation issue where they could have added some intelligence. So I think working with your vendor partners, because this isn't a simple lift, and so it is something that I think takes a village, as they say. And I think the vendor community is much more open to doing that too, because they recognize that they have a lot of intelligence to add, but at the same time it makes for a happy customer, and a happy customer buys things again, and that's good for their business. And at the same time, they understand that, you know, education is important because the people working for them have to go to school, you know, and so there is that cyclical connectedness to it.
I'm not sure I can add a heck of a lot more than what Jeff has already stated here. Other than he's talking not only about the leveraging the knowledge and the intelligence that's out there, not trying to do it all locally, especially in Maine, where our school districts are so small compared to perhaps some others, but also the leadership buy-in. You know, you're not going to be successful in a one-to-one program if the superintendent and the principals aren't the key stakeholders. If you view it as a technology project, you're approaching it in totally the wrong way. This is a learning project, and therefore it has to have some vision and some buy-in at that level. Technology is just a tool.
I guess I'll add one more thing, which is I think there are folks out there who may be watching this thinking, well, that's all well and good, the state of Maine did that, but I'm a small district in rural, you know, name your state, because every state's got rural areas. And I don't know how we're going to be able to do something like that because we're not a whole state. And I have a lot of my peers at the state level who sometimes say, well, I don't think we could do, I mean, my state's not going to do that. And I think the reality is those things won't happen if someone doesn't step up and say, let's make this happen. And sometimes that's what it takes, is you've got to just find somebody who's willing to make enough noise to say, we can do this, but we've got to do it together. And there are some places that are city-states in this, New York City is a city-state, so they could quote-unquote do it alone, but you're talking about like 1.5 million kids, right? I mean, it's a very large place. But most of the United States is not that large. And so I think there is probably more desire to kind of team up and create consortia and collaborations than people may realize. It's just someone's got to step forward and make the ask. Take the leadership to say, I'll help organize this thing. I mean, I remember in the early years of MSLN, Jeff and his team actually responded to the bids because they knew no one else was going to. And so technically speaking, for the first number of years of MSLN, the university was actually a spin partner. They were a spin provider in the E-rate system, and we were paying them for internet service. But we knew that we can do this differently, and it just took a couple years for us to finally kind of get out from under that and say, okay, let's rewrite this thing. Let's create a better collaboration, a better consortia. And that's when Network Maine was born. And I think we've reaped a lot of benefit from that. But it takes people to step forward and recognize that you can do things as a larger group oftentimes. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're ceding control. People talk about local control, and you don't understand. My needs are different than their needs. A lot of this stuff isn't really different. I mean, there's going to be some little unique things here and there, but at the end of the day, people are people, kids are kids, learning's learning, and all the technical stuff, that's just straight, it's really not that different. Maybe the fiber pole's longer, or something like that. But at the end of the day, it's not like in one rural area they're not going to use fiber and another they are, with the exception of maybe certain mountainous areas where they decide it's easier to use microwave towers. But again, by and large, the methodologies, the way these things work, the consortia and doing things as large groups can very often be very beneficial. And I think people have to not allow their knowledge of what's going to make it hard slow them down. Sometimes you just got to just leap right past it, start with what you want, and start building, reverse engineer it and figure it out. Okay, if that's what we want, then what do we need to get there? And start knocking them down one at a time, and realize that sometimes there's policy issues. So don't be afraid to go to your legislators and say, here's a policy issue. We need to change the law. Or maybe there's something at the E-rate level. Well, that's where all this, public commentary back to the FCC has been, and there's been an enormous amount of feedback given to the FCC as they've looked to kind of reformulate E-rate into kind of its major, first major kind of revision. So don't be afraid, I think, to get out there, assert some leadership, make some noise, try and create, partnerships where you can. And realize that where there's policy that needs to be changed, you just got to go talk to the policymakers, because believe it or not, if you can present them with overwhelming logic, very often they'll follow it. Not always, but very often they will. So.